July 14, 1974. Beirut, Lebanon. The Mediterranean sun beats down mercilessly on the city they once called the Paris of the Middle East. In a cramped apartment in the Hamra district, Thomas Callahan stands frozen, his hands trembling as he holds a Minox camera no larger than a cigarette lighter. The device is still warm. Behind him, through the open window, the sounds of the city drift upward. Car horns, Arabic pop music from a nearby cafe, the distant call to prayer. But Thomas hears none of it. His world has collapsed into this single moment, this tiny piece of German engineering that has just destroyed everything he believed about the woman he loves. The camera was hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, a book Nadia had given him 6 months ago, inscribed with words he can still recite from memory. For Thomas, who sees beauty in broken things, he'd found it by accident, reaching for the book to reread a passage about love that reminded him of her. The false bottom had given way, and there it was, nestled among the carved-out pages like a venomous secret. Thomas Callahan is 32 years old, a petroleum engineer from Houston who came to Lebanon 2 years ago with Aramco's Regional Survey Division. His job is to map potential pipeline routes from the Persian Gulf through the Levant to Mediterranean ports, work that carries the weight of billions in projected revenue and the energy security of the Western world. He is good at his work, meticulous and thorough, trusted with classified survey data that charts not just geological formations, but the future flow of Middle Eastern oil. But in this moment, standing in Nadia's apartment with her betrayal literally in his hands, none of that professional identity matters. He is simply a man whose heart is breaking. Nadia Khoury is 28, a translator and fixer for foreign companies operating in Beirut. She speaks 5 languages fluently: Arabic, French, English, Armenian, and passable Hebrew learned from childhood friends in the city's once-integrated neighborhoods. She has dark eyes that seem to hold centuries of Levantan history, and a laugh that made Thomas believe, for the first time in his pragmatic engineer's life, in something beyond equations and survey maps. They met in September 1972 at an archaeological site in Byblos, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Thomas had driven up the coast on a rare day off, seeking respite from the technical drawings and geological surveys that consumed his working hours. Nadia was there photographing Phoenician ruins for a cultural preservation project, or so she said. They struck up a conversation about the ancient maritime traders who had once sailed from these shores, carrying purple dye and cedar wood to every corner of the Mediterranean. They were the first globalists, Nadia had said, her camera hanging around her neck, the same camera Thomas now realizes she has used for far darker purposes. They didn't see borders. They saw connections, trade routes, shared humanity. Thomas had been enchanted. Here was someone who understood that infrastructure, whether ancient trade routes or modern pipelines, was about more than commerce. It was about connecting people, building bridges across the fractured geography of human civilization. Or so he thought. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully, with the kind of deliberate intimacy that Thomas, looking back, can now recognize as tradecraft. Dinners at seaside restaurants in Jowney, where they discussed poetry and politics. Weekend trips to Baalbek to explore Roman temples, where Nadia would photograph the ruins and Thomas would explain the engineering genius of ancient aqueducts. Long nights in her apartment or his, talking about their dreams for a region that seemed perpetually on the edge of either renaissance or collapse. Nadia spoke often about peace, about a future where Palestinians and Israelis, Christians and Muslims, could coexist in the pluralistic harmony that Beirut itself seemed to embody. Thomas believed her. He believed in her vision because he wanted to believe that his work, the pipelines and infrastructure projects that would bring prosperity to the region, could be part of that peaceful future. She was so convincing because, Thomas realizes now, she probably believed it herself. The best lies are the ones wrapped around a core of truth. Their physical relationship began 4 months after they met, on New Year's Eve 1973. They had watched fireworks over the Mediterranean from her apartment balcony, and when she kissed him, Thomas felt something he had never experienced in his methodical, engineering-focused life. The sense that he had found his place in the world, that all his careful calculations had led him to this moment, this woman, this city of ancient stones and modern dreams. He told her things he shouldn't have. Not classified information, not at first, but context. The kind of background details that a skilled intelligence operative could use to fill in gaps, to understand the significance of documents she might photograph, to know which survey maps mattered and which were routine. "We're mapping a route through the Bekaa Valley," he might have mentioned over dinner, thinking it harmless shop talk. "The geology is tricky, but if we can solve it, we could move Saudi crude to European markets without relying on Suez or Turkish pipelines." Nadia would listen with apparent casual interest, asking intelligent questions that seemed born of genuine curiosity rather than operational necessity. Wouldn't that change the balance of power in the region, if Lebanon became a major transit point? "That's the idea," Thomas would reply, pleased to have someone who understood the geopolitical implications of his technical work. Economic interdependence, give everyone a stake in stability. She would smile, touch his hand across the table, and he would feel like the luckiest man in the Middle East. But Nadia Khoury was not just a translator and cultural enthusiast. She was an asset for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, specifically a cell focused on economic intelligence. Her recruitment had happened 3 years earlier, after Israeli airstrikes killed her younger brother during a raid on a refugee camp in southern Lebanon, where he had been teaching. The PFLP had approached her not with ideology but with purpose. Her language skills, her access to foreign companies, her ability to move through Beirut's international community without suspicion. They had trained her in basic photography, in how to identify valuable intelligence, in the art of elicitation, drawing out information without asking direct questions. But mostly they had trained her to build relationships, to become indispensable, to make herself into someone that lonely expatriates and idealistic engineers would trust. Thomas had been an ideal target. Unmarried, isolated from his family back in Texas, working on projects of immense strategic value and hungry for connection in a foreign land. The PFLP hadn't ordered Nadia to seduce him, exactly. They had simply made it clear that whatever it took to maintain access to his work was acceptable, necessary for the cause. And somewhere in the process, something unexpected happened. Nadia fell in love with him. Not enough to stop photographing his documents, not enough to betray her cause or the memory of her dead brother, but enough to feel the weight of what she was doing, enough to lie awake some nights after Thomas had fallen asleep beside her, wondering if there was any way to reconcile the two halves of her life. There wasn't. There never is. Thomas sets the camera down on Nadia's desk, next to a stack of books about Phoenician maritime history. His hands are steadier now, but his mind is racing through memories, recontextualizing every moment of their relationship through the lens of this discovery. The times she had visited his apartment and he had left her alone while he took phone calls or made coffee. The weekend he had been called away to an emergency meeting in Riyadh and returned to find his briefcase had been moved slightly, though nothing seemed missing. The way she always seemed interested in his work, but never too interested, never asking questions that would raise suspicion. How many times had she photographed his documents? How much damage had been done? The survey maps he works with are not just geological data. They contain information about potential pipeline routes, pumping station locations, security assessments, projected capacity figures, and political risk analyses. In the wrong hands, that information could be used to plan sabotage operations, to leverage negotiations, to shift the balance of power in a region where oil is not just an economic commodity but a weapon. The Palestinian resistance movements understand this. They have watched as oil wealth has flowed to conservative Gulf monarchies, while Palestinian refugees live in camps, as Western companies extract billions in value while the Arab world remains fractured and dependent. Intelligence about pipeline infrastructure is a form of leverage, a way to insert themselves into negotiations, to make themselves impossible to ignore. But there are other players in this game, and Thomas knows enough about regional politics to understand the implications. If Nadia has been passing intelligence to Palestinian operatives, then Israeli intelligence, the Mossad, will be hunting her network. The Israelis cannot allow detailed information about energy infrastructure to circulate among groups they consider terrorists. They will act decisively and without mercy. And if they are already watching Nadia, then they are watching him too. The apartment door opens. Thomas turns, and there she is, Nadia, carrying a bag of groceries, her hair pulled back in the casual style she wears on weekends. She sees his face first, then follows his gaze to the camera on the desk, and Thomas watches as understanding and fear flash across her features in rapid succession. For a moment, neither of them speaks. The sounds of Beirut continue outside, oblivious to the small human drama unfolding in this third-floor apartment. "How long?" Thomas asks, his voice barely above a whisper. Nadia sets down the groceries slowly, carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter what remains between them. "From the beginning," she says, and Thomas appreciates that she doesn't insult him with lies or evasions. "They asked me to get close to you, to access your work." Thomas tastes the word like poison, Palestinian intelligence. "The PFLP, Nadia confirms. "After my brother died, they gave me a way to fight back. To do something that mattered. By using me." The words hurt to say, each syllable a small death. Nadia moves closer, and Thomas sees tears in her eyes, though he no longer knows if they are real or another calculated performance. "It started that way," she says. "But Thomas, what we became to each other, that was real. I never expected to feel this way. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did it anyway." Thomas picks up the camera again, holding it between them like evidence in a trial. "How many times, Nadia? How much have you compromised?" She doesn't answer immediately, and in that silence, Thomas understands the scope of the betrayal. Months of photographed documents, dozens of classified maps and reports. Intelligence that has already been analyzed, disseminated, acted upon. They needed to understand the infrastructure, Nadia finally says. To know where the West is vulnerable, where leverage exists. It's not about destruction, Thomas. It's about having a seat at the table, about making sure Palestinian interests are considered when these pipelines are built, when these deals are made. "You don't get to decide that," Thomas says, anger finally breaking through his shock. You don't get to steal classified intelligence and tell yourself it's for peace. People could die, Nadia. Infrastructure attacks, sabotage, regional instability that spirals into war. You've given them the keys to chaos. And what has your company given the region? Nadia's voice rises, her own anger surfacing. Wealth for kings and sheiks while refugees starve. Pipelines that bypass Palestinian territories, that treat us like we don't exist. You talk about infrastructure bringing peace, but it's infrastructure designed to maintain the status quo, to keep power in the hands of those who already have it. Thomas wants to argue, to defend the idealistic vision of development and prosperity that brought him to this region. But standing in this apartment, holding evidence of espionage, he realizes how naive he has been. Infrastructure is never neutral. Pipelines are political, and he has been a player in a game he barely understood. What happens now? He asks. Nadia sits down on the edge of her bed, suddenly looking exhausted. That depends on you. If you report this, I'll be arrested, probably killed if the Israelis get to me first. My network will be rolled up. People I care about will die. And if I don't report it, Thomas asks, though he already knows the answer. Then you're complicit, Nadia says softly. You become part of the conspiracy. Your career ends, possibly your freedom. And the intelligence is already out there, Thomas. Reporting me now doesn't put that genie back in the bottle. Thomas moves to the window, looking out over Beirut. The city stretches below, a patchwork of neighborhoods and communities that have coexisted for centuries. But he knows what's coming. The tensions that have been building for years, the sectarian divisions that Nadia's pluralistic vision tried to deny, are about to explode into civil war. Within months, this beautiful, complicated city will tear itself apart. And he is standing at his own personal crossroads, forced to choose between love and duty, between the woman who gave him purpose and the professional obligations that define him. Tell me about your brother, Thomas says, not turning from the window. Nadia is quiet for a moment. Then, Karim, he was 21. He wanted to be a teacher. He was tutoring refugee children in the camp, teaching them English and mathematics, trying to give them skills for a future that might never come. The Israelis said the camp was harboring militants. Maybe it was, but Karim wasn't a militant. He was just a teacher. The airstrike killed him and 17 children. Thomas closes his eyes. He wants to say that her brother's death doesn't justify espionage. That personal tragedy cannot excuse betrayal. But he thinks about his own younger sister back in Houston, about what he might do if someone killed her, about the rage and grief that could transform a translator into a spy. I'm sorry, he says, and means it. So am I, Nadia replies. For Karim, for us, for all of it. Thomas turns back to face her. The Israelis know, don't they? They're already watching you. Nadia nods slowly. I think so. There have been signs. A car that follows too consistently. A man in a cafe who pays too much attention. My handler says I'm being paranoid, but I know what surveillance feels like. Then you need to run, Thomas says, tonight. Before they move on you. And you, Nadia asks, what will you do? It's the question that will define the rest of Thomas Callahan's life. He can report what he's discovered, fulfill his obligation to his company and his country, and watch as Nadia is hunted down. He can stay silent, protect the woman he loves, and become complicit in intelligence operations that could destabilize the entire region. Or he can try to find some impossible third path, some way to minimize the damage while preserving what remains of his humanity. He thinks about the Phoenician traders they discussed at Byblos, the ancient merchants who saw connections instead of borders. He thinks about the infrastructure he has dedicated his career to building, the pipelines that were supposed to bring prosperity and peace. He thinks about Nadia's brother, killed in a camp, and about all the other brothers and sisters and children caught in the machinery of Middle Eastern conflict. And he realizes that there are no good choices, only degrees of complicity and compromise. "I'll give you 24 hours, Thomas says finally. "Tomorrow night, I report the security breach to my company. I'll say I discovered evidence of espionage, but the perpetrator fled before I could identify them. It's thin and they might not believe me, but it gives you time to disappear." Nadia stands, moves toward him, but stops when she sees him step back. "Thomas, I do love you. That was never part of the operation. That was real." "Maybe it was," Thomas says, his voice hollow. "But it doesn't matter now. Love isn't enough to bridge what's between us. You chose your cause, I have to choose mine or what's left of it." "What will you do?" Nadia asks. "After you report it." "Leave Lebanon," Thomas says. "Request a transfer. Try to forget that I was ever naive enough to believe in peace through pipelines and love through lies." He walks to the door, then pauses. "Where will you go?" "It's better if you don't know," Nadia says. "But Thomas, the intelligence I gathered, it's not what you think. We're not planning attacks on infrastructure. We're building leverage for negotiations, for a seat at the table when the future of this region is decided. I know you can't forgive me, but I need you to understand that I believed I was working for peace, just like you." Thomas looks at her one last time, memorizing her face, knowing he will spend years wondering if anything between them was real. "The road to hell," he says quietly, "is paved with good intentions and classified documents." He leaves the apartment, walking down the stairs and out into the brutal summer heat of Beirut. Behind him, Nadia Khoury begins the process of disappearing, packing a go bag she has kept prepared for months, making coded phone calls to her handler, preparing to vanish into the networks of safe houses and false identities that the PFLP maintains across the region. Thomas walks without direction, his mind numb, his heart a bruised and broken thing. He thinks about reporting to the American embassy immediately, about his duty to prevent further intelligence leaks. But he gave his word, and even now, even after everything, that matters to him. 24 hours. One day for Nadia to escape, and then he will face the consequences of his silence. He doesn't know, as he walks through the streets of Beirut that afternoon, that Mossad has indeed been tracking Nadia's network for 3 months. He doesn't know that Israeli intelligence has already identified him as a compromised source, that they are debating whether he is a willing participant or a useful idiot. He doesn't know that by giving Nadia 24 hours, he has signed his own professional death warrant. And he doesn't know that the intelligence Nadia gathered, the pipeline surveys and infrastructure assessments, will indeed be used for negotiations, but also for targeting. That in the wars to come, in the decades of conflict that will consume Lebanon and the broader Middle East, the information she photographed will inform sabotage operations, political leverage, and the kind of asymmetric warfare that turns civilian infrastructure into military objectives. But he will learn. In the years ahead, Thomas Callahan will watch from afar as Lebanon descends into 15 years of civil war. He will see pipeline projects abandoned, development dreams shattered, the Paris of the Middle East transformed into a symbol of sectarian hatred and regional proxy conflict. He will be quietly dismissed from Aramco 6 months after reporting the security breach, his career in petroleum engineering effectively over. The official reason will be restructuring, but Thomas will know the truth. He is damaged goods, a security risk, a man who let love compromise classified intelligence. He will return to Houston, take a teaching position at a small engineering college, and spend his evenings wondering what happened to Nadia Khoury. He will never know that she made it to Damascus, that she continued working for Palestinian intelligence for another decade, that she eventually left the operational side to work in refugee education, trying to honor her brother's memory by teaching children who had lost everything. He will never know that she thought of him often, that she kept a photograph of them together at Biblos hidden in her belongings, that she sometimes wondered if there had been another way, a path that didn't require betrayal and broken hearts. They will never see each other again. But on this day, July 14, 1974, they are both still in Beirut, separated by a few city blocks and an unbridgeable chasm of conflicting loyalties. Thomas walks toward his apartment, carrying the weight of his decision. Nadia packs her bag, preparing to become someone else, to disappear into the underground networks that will define the rest of her life. And above them, the Mediterranean sun continues its merciless descent, burning down on a city that will soon burn itself, on a region where oil and blood flow with equal abundance, on the wreckage of a love that was real and false in equal measure. The story of Thomas Callahan and Nadia Khoury is not unique. Throughout the Cold War, across the fractured lines of the Middle East, similar dramas played out in hotel rooms and apartments, in archaeological sites and oil fields. Spies and assets, lovers and liars, idealists and operatives, all caught in the machinery of geopolitical conflict that reduced human connection to operational necessity. Their story matters because it illuminates the human cost of intelligence work, the way that global conflicts are fought not just with armies and weapons, but with intimacy and betrayal, with the weaponization of love itself. It matters because it shows how infrastructure, those pipelines and survey maps that seem so technical and neutral, are in fact the arteries of power, the physical manifestation of political will. And it matters because it reminds us that in the shadows of the Cold War, in the proxy conflicts and intelligence operations that shaped the modern Middle East, there were real people making impossible choices, trying to navigate between love and duty, between personal loyalty and political commitment, between the dream of peace and the reality of endless conflict. Thomas gave Nadia 24 hours. It was an act of love, of mercy, of complicity. It was perhaps the most important decision of his life, and it solved nothing. The intelligence was already compromised. The pipelines would be built or abandoned based on factors far beyond his control. The region would descend into decades of war regardless of his choice. But for one day, he chose love over duty. He chose to give the woman who betrayed him a chance to survive. And in the moral calculus of Cold War espionage, in the brutal arithmetic of intelligence operations, that small act of mercy might be the only thing that redeems any of them. The sun sets over Beirut on July 14, 1974. Tomorrow, Thomas Callahan will begin the process of reporting a security breach, of ending his career, of trying to rebuild a life from the wreckage of betrayal. Tomorrow, Nadia Khoury will be gone, vanished into the networks that will protect her and use her and ultimately consume her. But tonight, for a few more hours, they are both still in the city they loved, the city that promised peace and delivered only heartbreak, the city that was supposed to be different. Beirut, the Paris of the Middle East, on the edge of civil war. And two people who loved each other across the unbridgeable divide of conflicting loyalties, learning that in the world of Cold War espionage, love is never enough, and betrayal is the only currency that matters.